Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here. Recently, I've been covering a story about Pastor James Coates of Grace Life Church in Edmonton, Canada, and he is being held in a correctional facility because of his COVID stance. He has not limited his church's attendance to 15% per the public health order. So as a result, ultimately, he is being held in this correctional facility. I saw another interesting story related to this today. It says a Calgary church holds service to support arrested Edmonton pastor who broke COVID-19 rules. A Calgary church that has previously broken COVID-19 rules opened its doors Sunday and held a full service in support of the Edmonton pastor who remains in custody after refusing to follow the restrictions. Pastor Tim Stevens of Fairview Baptist Church in Calgary told Global News that he is prepared to face the legal consequences. So really, this Pastor Tim Stevens sounds a lot like Pastor James Coates in his willingness to face whatever consequences come for his actions. He says, James Coates is a good friend of mine, and it's sad what's happened to him, Stevens said. I'm prepared if that's the same consequence for myself. I know other pastors feel the same way, that want to stand with him and support him and our brothers and sisters at Grace Life Church. Near Edmonton, Grace Life Church also held a service Sunday despite being previously issued a closure order from Alberta Health Services. The Sunday service was so busy that some members were turned away as the building had reached its full fire code capacity. COVID-19 rules in Alberta say churches should only allow 15% of that amount through the doors. So this is interesting that actually the church attendance has increased and they reached full fire code capacity last Sunday as Pastor Coates was in the correctional facility. Going on, the article says, there were at least 3 police cruisers present at Grace Life on Sunday. RCMP said in a news release that they continued their investigation into Grace Life Church on Sunday and that observations were made that the church held a service beyond the designated capacity. RCMP said officials are working to determine the next course of action and plan to provide an update later in the week. So it sounds like Grace Life Church is actually possibly facing further consequences. They are being monitored, it sounds like, by the authorities. And so later this week, we'll see what happens with that church. Presently, though, they are continuing to meet while Pastor Coates is incarcerated. But you see a tweet here from Chris Chaikin. So many vehicles are arriving for Sunday service at Grace Life Church. Members monitoring the parking lot can be heard telling people that they are at max capacity of their fire code and are encouraging people to live stream the service. So really, all of this situation is kind of having the opposite effect that the authorities are going for. It's actually more people who are showing up rather than less. Coates remains in custody at Edmonton's Remand Center. On Saturday, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the center and called for his release. Around 20 people held a much smaller protest and outdoor sermon in support of Coates at the center on Sunday afternoon. Calgary's Stevens said that he believes many parishioners around the province desire to worship God freely. These health restrictions are limiting and hindering our ability to do that. So we're standing today with Grace Life and other churches across our province to worship and to say that church is essential. And what that pastor is talking about there is really a key point here. I think this is the message and the sentiment that a lot of these Christians are really getting at here, that they want to say church is essential. They feel like church is being treated like any other entity in the culture, but what they believe is that church is so vital. And I think it is a really interesting thing to consider that if the culture thought that church was essential, would it change the way that the government is dealing with churches and the restrictions they place on churches? Perhaps governments would be less restrictive if they really did feel that church is essential. So I think there's a really important theological point here. Now, people are going to come back and say, but you can still do church even if you don't meet all together in one place. But I think a strong argument that's being made by some of these churches is for a certain period of time that might be the case, but it definitely affects the way we minister to people if we can't meet the way we normally do. And I think a lot of us from experience know that it is important to gather with Christians. We know that that definitely has an impact on our lives when we can physically be with other Christians who are part of our church and all come together as one body. So there's really strong points being made here, and it's not now just one church. We have another church that's actually standing up. We'll see if more churches begin to do this in Canada. Stevens added that his church has put up COVID-19 signage and has masks available for those who would like one. So it's not to say that these churches and church leaders aren't taking any precautions whatsoever and are not allowing for people to take their own health measures according as they see fit. What they're saying, though, is they don't want to prevent people from coming to church, attending church, if those people want to come. The Edmonton Interfaith Center released a letter this month signed by over 24 different faith leaders that asked religious leaders and all Albertans to attend closely to the recommendations and directives of public health officers. Netta Follett, the coordinator for the center, said that the group will not comment on specific churches, but believes those of all faith should be looking out for the greater good. So we see this contrast a lot. Churches that have a conviction and feel they ought to be meeting with other leaders who say, well, we have to look at the greater good, the safety of the public at large. So this is a contrast and an argument that has been going on for months. It's not always an easy question to answer. What I always say, though, is look at the facts, look at the actual numbers, and if the activities of a certain person or group of people is having a negative impact, of course adjustments should be made. But let's say a church is meeting and people are not contracting the disease and it's not spreading with them, then does it make sense for a government to come down really hard against them and for people to be blaming them and making it sound like they're doing something really harmful to others? That's where I would tend to be more open-minded about churches that are meeting and just say, let's look at the facts. That's what I've said with Pastor MacArthur's church as well. This person says, to do something that is not for the social good, we should think about that, Follett said. Are we listening to God? Are we listening to our ego? Are we listening to our own possibly selfish desires? So it almost sounds like this person is saying that in some cases it's selfish to want to go to church and be with other people rather than continue to follow the lockdown orders. I kind of get what's being said there, that if the government is trying to protect people, then it's selfish just to do what you want to do. And yes, it could be an ego thing to say, yeah, I'm not going to listen to what the authorities said. But I really don't get that sense from Pastor Coates. I think he generally is trying to be submissive to the government, but he has a conviction, and it's not about selfishness on his part or on the part of the church members. So I think this is where these contrasts can be a little bit unfair, but people do have different perspectives on this whole situation. Follett added that she believes the vast majority of religious centers in the province are following the rules. To see people in a church being charged with anything, with an offense, it's unfortunate, she said, and I hope that parishioners will all question whether it's worth it. And my guess is that a church like Grace Life and the pastor there would say it is definitely worth it because they have a conviction. They have a deep-seated belief that church is essential. Going on, the article says, AHS said it does not provide direction to police or municipal enforcement, but instead works in partnership with them. If AHS is made aware of a complaint and following an inspection or investigation deems that further action is required by either police or city bylaw, we will contact them. Police have the ability to issue fines or lay charges under the Public Health Act. The city of Calgary said often tickets are not immediately issued to ensure we can investigate properly. We will provide an update on any enforcement activity as part of our update on Thursday. So if I'm reading this correctly, this sounds like this has to do with the authorities dealing with the church in Calgary that is also open now in support of the church in Edmonton. So it will be interesting to see what happens with these churches as well as if other churches open, because remember, Pastor Coates' wife Erin said that one way you can support her husband is by opening your churches, worshiping freely, and following the stand that he's taking. So it will be interesting to see if other churches follow suit. Now again, a lot of this is very controversial. People have very strong opinions about issues like this. I would love to hear your opinions in the comments below, but please try to keep your comments constructive and helpful to conversation. But thank you so much for listening to this report brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.